Hey, welcome to the props department's very first YouTube video. In this video we're going to be covering how to put latex rubber on this plaster mold I made. So to make this, I included some photos at the end of this video. I didn't videotape the process, but I used a life cast of a 5-year-old, and then I sculpted a Batman Cowl on top of that using clay, and then I cast that out of plaster, and get this. So it's like a negative mold of everything. So the products we got to use to get to this point, I like to use this spot putty. Originally this was a 2-part mold, but rather than dealing with flashing, which is like when the two mold halves come together, you'll have a little bit of the rubber or the latex leak out the sides, and then you have to take a scalpel or a pair of good scissors. Upholstery scissors work good to clean it up. So rather than that, because I'll never have to really take this mold apart, latex masks are very easy to get out of molds when they're done, I decided to epoxy it together. And that's just 5-minute epoxy you can get at any dollar store, hardware store. It doesn't need to be fancy. And then I filled the seams and all the little holes and all the discrepancies full of this. So that's 3M. It's Bondo glazing and spot putty, and it doesn't really matter about the brand. None of these matter about the brand really. They all do the same thing, and it's just a putty you put on with your finger or a piece of cardboard. Fill it up, let it dry about an hour, and then you sand it off with, I go usually 100 grit sandpaper, then I jump to like 150 grit, and then to 220, and you want to sand it like in circles so you don't leave any big sand marks. So this stuff is good. We use a lot of stuff here at the props department. Once you've done that, the way you want to prime it. So for priming, I use this. It's Rust-Oleum's Primer Gray, and again, it doesn't matter about the brand. They all basically do the same thing. I just find that the odor isn't too bad on this. Some spray paints you can really smell, like if you have neighbors or you're doing it in your kitchen or your basement, maybe you don't want that smell. So I prime that, give that a good coat. Then that also lets you see the discrepancy. So if you missed a pinhole from molding, or you missed anything like that, then you can easily see it. And then you would go back over it with the spot putty, sand it again, and repaint it. And I like to do 2 or 3 coats of this just to be on the safe side. And that also lays down a good bottom coat for your clear coat that you got to put over it. And for clear coat, we use the same brand, Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch. And semi-gloss clear, it can be anything. It can be an old can you have laying around. You just want to build up a coating to provide a barrier between your plaster mold and your latex rubber that you're putting on. Because if you don't do that, when you pull the rubber mold out, your mask, in this case the Batman Cowl, you'll find sometimes it'll pull some of your plaster out. So then if you want to do another mold, you're going to be spending a lot of time repairing the stuff you just repaired on it. So I do 2 or 3 coats of that, let this all dry, and then you get to the stage of a prepped mold being ready for the latex. So now let's talk about latex. So for latex, we at the props department here, we use the mold builder, and it doesn't really matter what kind of latex. It can be any latex you could think of. This is Casting Craft, available at Michael's. It's like a big craft superstore, kind of like a Walmart but for crafts if you're not familiar with it. You can get it anywhere. You can get it online. You can get gallons of this stuff. You can get you can get a big barrel of it. But for our purposes, this goes good with that, and then it won't dry out as much because latex is air dried. So when you first get latex, you'll get that white color, and that's how liquid latex looks, but it dries like a tan. And if you've ever seen the inside of a Halloween mask, you got that tan color. That's how it dries. It's kind of translucent. But since this is a Batman Cowl for my 5-year-old, we have to tint it. And as you can see, it comes out like a gray. But when it dries, it'll be really black. So to tint that, we just use this. Black Crafter's paint. We got this at the dollar store for, I think it was $1. Really good paint for everything. I use it for weathering props, so on and so forth. But what we do is you want to squirt in a bit of it, stir it up really good so it's uniform, no streaks. And then for this particular mold, I did 3 like 2-second blasts, so 6 seconds worth of paint, if that makes sense. And then that gets it to this point. And to test it along the way, you want to take a little bit on your finger and just rub it on a piece of newspaper, let it dry in front of a fan, and that gives you your final color, so you can darken it, lighten it, and that holds true with anything you make. You can color it with any kind of craft paint. You can also get pigments and so on and so forth for it, but you don't really need to. That stuff does good enough. A good tip working with latex is to always keep the lid on nice and tight because it does air dry. As well as if you're working with your mold and you accidentally hit it, it won't fall off and it'll cost you, like this here container is $30. So yeah, so that's basically the basics of it. Another thing to keep in mind with latex, it has a strong ammonia smell, so you don't want to take a big whiff of it, but it's not going to stink up your whole apartment or if you're doing it in your basement or whatever. So now for application brush. Now before we put on the latex, we want to use a mold release. I just use Vaseline. I got this stuff cheap. You can use a silicone mold release, and that's, you know, up here it's $18 Canadian, but just to do a mask, the good thing about props is to use what you got around the house. It makes it better, I think, in the end. So this does it good. And you just want to put it on a thin layer. So you just take a cloth, like a baby sock works great, piece of old sheet, some Kleenex or whatever, and you want to dip it in here like this, and you want to rub it on your mold. And you don't want to brush it on because you'll leave brush marks which will transfer into the final coat of the latex of your mask that you're making. So you want to rub it in, go all over it, up here, like in here there's a chin, the nose, 2 ear holes. You want to get as good as you can. And the best thing to do is get yourself a good flashlight. And then you can see where you're going with it. So if you can see where you missed or whatever. And keep in mind that this is just a prop for Halloween, so you don't need to be perfect about it. And anything you make is going to be really cool, especially your first one. So once we got it to this, so that's basically how to get it ready for latex. So the next step we're going to go over is pouring it. We got to do a beauty coat. So what you want to do is you take your tinted latex. You always want to stir it when you take off the lid because it will separate. You take your mold, you put it upside down like this, hang on to it. You pour in a little bit, and you'll be able to judge it. Every time you do a coat, you'll be able to judge if you put in too much. So we're going to go over that step next. And yeah, we'll see what we got. Alright, so we're going to start on the latex now. So after you have all that prep work done, you want to take your mold, put it upright like this. After stirring it, you just pour a little bit in, like maybe this much, just to get it a good coat. And then like I was saying, you can put it down because it's not too runny. And then stick the lid back on because you want that to dry out. And then you just proceed to brush it around everything. Try to get everything coated. Get up into the spots you can't see and overdo it because you want to make sure you got everything. In the nose, around the eyes, because there's an eyebrow that gets kind of, if you miss it, it's really going to mess it up. So you just keep going. Brush it everywhere you can think of, and you'll find you'll have a lot in there, but once you start stippling it, it'll go pretty good. So yeah, just want to stipple it like this. Like so, on the flange as well, because that'll give you that spot where you can take off. And you don't need to hurry it. It takes a long time for this to dry. Like you're looking at 2 or 3 hours for a layer to dry. And you'll be able to tell when it's dry because of the color change. It's pretty noticeable. It's going on, it looks like gray floor paint right now. And just do the best you can. Make sure you get all the, because this is being your beauty coat, you want the first layer to be perfect. So you get and you will get latex on your hands, but that comes off. All this cleans off with cold water and soap, just like paint does. And then you want to keep stippling. Inspect your mold as you go, because some spots you'll miss just out of habit. But this is your most important coat. So you want to make sure it's okay. And you'll notice too when you stipple it, it really makes, like I was saying, a uniform coat. You don't really have to worry too much. And just keep going over it. It's better to go over it more times than not, because then you know you got a good coat. and your end product will be very good. And your kids may love you forever for doing this for them. And the more I find the more energy is spent on getting your mold right, the better the end product, of course. So feel free to take a while to do it. Yeah. Now a good tip too is when you're doing because this is a bat cowl, so it's got the ear holes at the very bottom of this mold. You want to poke those with like a stick or end of a paintbrush, anything like that, and that'll get rid of the big air bubble that's trapped in there. Because you'll think that it's full of latex, but it's really not. It's got a big air bubble, and then when you pull the mold at the end, you'll notice half your ear is missing, or same goes with the nose. I like to do the nose and the chin, any place I can't see, over and over and over and over, because then I know for sure. That's good. So you keep. Now what you'll notice too when you're stippling is you'll see a bad texture. It'll be pretty rough, like not too rough, but you could imagine. I'll show you here when I'm done doing this. But that's okay because the front of your mold, like the actual surface you'll be seeing, won't have that. It'll be nice and smooth. Latex kind of finds its own level, so it evens itself out. You just want to make absolutely sure you got all the air bubbles out. And this mold's not too bad. It's not too hard. But if you're doing something with a lot of details, it's imperative you get rid of all the air bubbles, or you're really gonna mess it up. Now you can patch it afterwards, work on the seam, or if you miss a place, because latex does stick to latex. And I'll be going over that in another video, but because there's a lot of steps to it, but you can fix it. Just being a bat cowl, you just want to make sure it's nice and smooth. Whereas if you were doing a Halloween mask or a zombie character, you know, maybe if you missed a place, it wouldn't matter too much. So I'll keep doing this. As you can see, I'm spending a lot of time on it, which is good. That's a mark of a good propsman, is if you spend a lot of time on it, even the simplest of projects. So I think I got it all covered here. Good way to do the side of it, because it's going to be circular, is just to bang it like that and just rotate your brush. Because you can see I got a lot of latex on there. And also, before you start this, make sure you're not allergic to latex, because some people are very allergic. And just do like a little sample on your hand and see if you pop up, get red. That's pretty good. And you can see I'm doing it more than necessary because I want the end product to be perfect. Because you don't want to make Batman mad, that's for sure. And yes, it'll make funny noises as you go along, but that's part of the process. Now, once you think you got it good, I mean, you take a look at it around. A good flashlight in there helps you too. But I have enough light in here that I can see it. And then, like I said, again, make sure you go over underneath the eyes, because everything here is upside down. So you want to make sure you got the eyebrow part good. I'm going over it again, just to make sure. The nose especially, and those ears, you want to make sure are good too. So when you're done that, here's what you got. Paintbrush there. And you got this. See, it's all stippled. That texture you see there will disappear. Like, you always have that texture on the inside, but you won't on the outside. And you give it a nice flange area there. And like I said before, you grab the end of your paintbrush and you poke the ears that are in there. Now get rid of that air pocket. And as well, it'll help push the latex down, because sometimes you can't really get it in there, especially with those makeup brushes. And that'll get you started on your first coat. After you've done that part with the ears, you want to go over it again, because your wrist will hit the edges of it as you bring it out. As you can see, my hand's covered in it. And you'll want to wash that off pretty quick when you're done this, because it sets from your body heat pretty quick, and it'll hurt just a little bit when you take it off your things. Yeah, so I think I got it good. That's right, so now after that's done, you want to do all your coats, but you want to give it proper drying time in between. So I'll give it about 2 or 3 hours. You can tell when it's dry because you'll see it turn black or whatever color you did it. And the next layer is easy to put on because you can tell where you put it on where you haven't done, because it'll be black, whereas this is gray. So I think I got a good coverage there. So I'm going to go let this dry, add some more areas, add some more latex to it. And you're looking at, like I said, an hour or two in between dry times. You can touch it with your finger. And if it's a little bit tacky, it's dry, you should be able to get good drying time with a big fan put on the inside. And I guess for the ammonia odors, I can't even smell it anymore. They dissipate pretty quickly. It's just in the container that you have to worry about. Yeah, so just make sure you do a really good job, especially on the first coat, because that's what you'll be seeing. Another thing too is if you want to stiffen this up, like if you don't want it to rip as much. Now latex is very stretchable, but if you're worried, if that's one of your concerns, get some cheesecloth available at any supermarket, barber shop, anything like that. And on your fourth or fifth coat, you just lay it in there, and you paint under it first. Lay your cheesecloth in, paint over it so it soaks into it, and it'll give you that extra strength you need. The downside to that would be once you cut the eye holes and the mouth holes, you might see the little threads of cheesecloth, which would throw off your end product. So I tend not to use that very much, but I have in the past. And yeah, just make sure you got everything good. I'll show you what I'm... And this will dry nice and black. As you can see, it's already on my hand starting to turn black there, right? A little bit black. But here's what you get when you're all done stippling it. It's nice and gray, all uniform. And again, it gives you nice thin coverage, uniform, dries equally, and gives you a better result. So I will go do 7 or 8 more coats of this, let dry. Once you're done all your coats, you should wait 24 to 48 hours before you pull the mold, before you pull the mask, because you want to make sure it's perfectly dry. If not, your ears will deform, or any whatever your sculpt is, it'll deform. So, and I like to go over that neck one last time because you're always hitting it with your hand. All right, so I'm going to do the other 3 or 4 I'm going to do the rest of the coats, and I'll show you the process to remove it, because there's a process to that too. Yeah, so here we go. All right, I'll be back with the finished one.